All right, it's 12 on the dot. If we can start, please. Please help me welcome on stage Sizwe. Sizwe is going to talk to us about domain-driven design. OverDrive, domain-driven design OverDrive. All right. All right, in keeping with the short introductions, I'm not going to give you a lengthy introduction. Sizwe tells me that he's from Soweto. He has tried everything under the sun. Right now, he's really passionate about software and software with quality software with a long shelf life. Please help me welcome Sizwe on stage.
Thank you, guys. Can you all hear me clearly? I think you can. But it would be nicer if you moved a little bit closer. Come on, guys. Come on, please. Please, the guys at the back there. Are you sure you want to sit all the way in the back there? Get that intimate space going, guys. No? You don't want to be intimate with me? No, okay, that's fine as well. I love hugs, but not right now. All right, guys. I shall project my voice. This is a talk about what I'm incredibly excited about. It's about, for me, the future of Agile and us, how we're going to write code, you know? Obviously, a lot of it is just thoughts that haven't really played out in any space. I work at InvestTech, and InvestTech has played a role in helping me form these ideas because of the strong personalities that you find over there. It's an investment bank, and they will, you know, shove stuff down your throat if you don't get stuff right. What's going on here? Okay. You know what I need to do? I need to plug in my charger so that it doesn't keep switching off at intervals. Thank you. And I want to approach this from the perspective of a fellow called Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein was a philosopher back in the day, back in around 1945. That's when he was really particularly famous. And what he made people realize, or what he brought to the forefront in the field of philosophy, is that language is your filter for everything. Everything that you do and think and are is tempered by language. And the implications of this, we've been exploring them. At the time when he said it, nobody understood him. They were like, what the hell is this crazy Austrian saying? Nobody understood what he was saying because he was also very obscure in the way that he spoke. Hence the cartoon. Nobody understands him, nor Wittgenstein. But over time, people have been delving into the line of work that he started and getting deeper and deeper into the understanding of this power of language. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. I'm going to give you a history of everything before Wittgenstein. It's doing, but my screen's fine. Why is it? Did I bring that mouse? Okay. That should be fine. I'll stay away from there. Yeah, so let's start at the very beginning. And I mean the very beginning. We're going to start at Genesis, guys. As it so turns out, first there was the Word. Right? And really, this came through in the Bible, but it came through from other cultures as well. The idea that the Word is a very primal force, and very closely linked to mind, actually. So we already see that from the very beginning, the Word has been, you know, fundamental. We move on. It's also in the Bible. We get the Tower of Babel. And in this story, it's really, really entertaining. People got too good at this language stuff. And the gods were like, no, we must smite them, for they are reaching our heights. And again, a testimony to the power of language. When you speak and understand each other, you can do, yes, guys, you can challenge the gods, right? And then fast forward 1945, Wittgenstein, he wasn't a nice guy. This Wittgenstein was very difficult to get along with, and he was touted as the guy who's going to save logical atomism in philosophy, which is the idea that you can build up this reality from a set of atomic ideas. But he was like, bullcrap, what is that? There is no such thing. You cannot build up this reality. Actually, all we're doing is playing word games. Everything is a word game, and depending on who you're talking to, the word game is different. Depending on the situation, the word game is different. There has never been one, sort of global context for these word games. We are all trapped within our respective language games that we play. Right. So then, next slide. Okay, button. We start to ask ourselves questions like, okay, what do all of these four things have in common? Any guesses, anybody? Human, computer, a dog, the dog's the biggest clue, and a group. No. Excuse me. The thing that they all have in common is that they're all programmable. Really. They're all programmable. Pavlov's dog, that's it right there. I just made a silhouette of it. No, I'm kidding. These are all programmable interface. And when we start realizing that we are all programmable interfaces and programming is happening even when you don't think it's happening, then you start playing a slightly different game from what you've been playing before. Which brings us neatly to the 3 laws of performance. The 3 laws of performance teach you how to play this game of programming anything through language. Now guys, I need to emphasize, these are not rules. These are not suggestions. These are laws. Akin to the laws of physics. There is no escape. This is truth that I am about to lay out for you here. Truth. There is no escape. So, first law. You will only perform as well as you understand the situation. It seems very straightforward. If you don't understand, you can't perform. Nothing more to say than that. Second of all, your understanding of these circumstances that you find yourself in is driven by the language that you use to talk about that circumstance, to describe it to yourself, to other people. That's actually your window into that circumstance. The language that you use, it drives the whole situation. So when people are having an argument and they can't seem to get together and understand it, it's because they're all using conflicting language that is not designed to take them above that. So, you get to point 3. If you want to design language differently or to change your circumstance, start designing your words. Start actively changing your words. This is the filter through which you change, not working harder. If you want to improve your performance, don't work harder. That's the worst thing you can do. Don't, do all sorts of other funny things. Just change the language that you use to describe the situation. Change the language that you use to describe yourself in the situation. That one is particularly fundamental because the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves turn out to be how we approach just about to color how we approach just about everything. So again, these are all laws, guys. You cannot, this is governing your life right now, right? Oh yeah, and on an aside, these words over here, stories, metaphors, words, context, symbolic imagery, all of those can replace language, and this will still make sense. Your understanding of circumstances is driven by your stories, your metaphors, your words, your context, your symbolic imagery. It still makes sense. And as well, software. You can replace yourself with software in the sense that your software will perform as well as it understands the circumstance. Your software performance or understanding of the circumstance is driven by the language that it uses to model itself. So again, we get a direct correlation between performance and domain-driven design. And that's what I was really gunning for. We get a direct correlation between performance and direct domain-driven design. So I shall now teach us how to... Why did it show all of them? They were supposed to slide in. Anyway. Don't read ahead. Language is a mind-altering substance, guys. That's what it is. When you hear somebody say something, what is happening is a mind-altering process. It lands in your mind, and something changes. Maybe infinitesimal, but something has changed. It's something you can reference at a later stage, you know? So you will never be the same having... You cannot unsee what you've seen, and you cannot unhear what you've heard. So it is a mind-altering substance. And it happens during conversation. And conversations, what they're trying to do with conversations is to create feedback loops, guys. Feedback loops is where meaning comes from. This is where Wittgenstein really came into his own, where he was trying to explain where meaning actually comes from. And he was trying to say that you can't give meaning to something, you know, sort of willy-nilly, or it's not sort of emanating from the idea that we have decided to call this thing a table, and the meaning of the word table comes from this thing. There is absolutely no connection between... Okay, it's actually called a podium. There's actually no correlation whatsoever between the things that we are saying and the things out there in reality. There is none whatsoever. So where does meaning actually come from? It's from the feedback loops that we create during conversation. When we talk to each other, I say a word, you understand it, probably very differently from the way I understood it. But then you use that word back at me. And then I see, oh, okay, he used it in this context. So that's slightly different from how I understood it. And the meaning of the word sort of changes a little bit. And as this goes on and on, meaning really comes into play, you know? And what it turns out is that programmers program conversations into software. That's what we actually do. We take these conversations that we're having and pull them just into software, because that's the shortest feedback loop between what is actually happening on the factory floor and software. But now, okay, so let's get closer to how that is actually done. What we're trying to do is, we're trying to take a conversation and put it in software. We've agreed that there's a direct correlation between your quality of your conversation and the words that you're using and the quality of your software. And now we want to actually get those words in there. And what happened is, that's what happened. Right. What happens is that these guys came up, I don't know who, they came up with a science called cybernetics. And I actually think that cybernetics is the future of science, because what they managed to isolate is the idea that systems are made up of feedback loops. In fact, feedback loops are the core unit of anything that you want to call a system, you know? And this understanding has profound effects on everything that we're trying to do as well. I have 15 minutes left. Thank you, sir. And what you see here is the ultimate model, the simplest model of a feedback loop. I can imagine it gets quite complex sometimes, but at the core, these will be the three components that you will find. You will find a controller. The controller says, this is what needs to be done. You will find a plant. Plant does it. And then you will find a sensor that tells the controller what happened when the plant did it. It creates that feedback loop. This feedback loop is fundamental to just about everything that we're trying to achieve. And when we bring that to the world of our world, this Agile conference, you see that software can be viewed as the controller. There's all sorts of different ways to model this, but I chose this one. Software is the controller, right? People actually doing stuff like the traders, the bankers, and all of those people who are using the software, they're the factory floor. They're the processes that we've coded. And then the conversation that we're having is the sensor that brings it back into the software. And the quality of that conversation is what's going to bring back quality software. Because I feel like that's exactly what Agile actually is. It's a conversation. And how do we get the stuff that we had in that conversation into software? Right. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into that. Because now we're going to go into domain-driven design and a theory called naked objects. In naked objects, what they were trying to say is that software needs to start being self-descriptive. And that actually becomes quite possible when you're doing proper OO. When you're doing service-oriented architecture, it's a little bit fuzzy because you're writing methods that suit, some sort of particular business need, and that always is the whim of, business and all of that type of stuff. But if you're writing object-oriented code in the classical sense, where your entire software is a model of the domain, and all of these objects have state and behavior, and all they ever do is interact with each other in a way that fulfills use cases. You've not coded a single use case, not even one. What you've done is created a set of objects that can fulfill various different use cases. It's a whole different mindset. And then in naked objects, they take that and they say, well, once you have that and you can sort of describe it, you are playing a totally different game. So instead of writing code that says do this, do that, and then do some other thing, and when you're done with all that, do this, what you would rather be doing is writing software that says these objects that we have written are capable of, right? Which is to say that the model is the software. There is no other piece of software that you write other than the model. Now that's a big thing. That's a big thing. But I really think that's where we're going to get to ultimately. I'm probably going into sort of theorizing right over here, but I think it's the way to go. Anyway, so what you get in that sort of scenario is the idea that the model is object orientation. Pure object orientation. And everything else is aspect. So that's my little symbol for model. Let's internationalize this. Let's put this in all these presentations of ours so that everybody uses it. No, I'm kidding. But everything else becomes aspect. So you don't write presentation code. It's aspect. You write it once and you can present any model. You don't write persistence code. Again, it's aspect. Any model can be, sort of persisted to the database and retrieved from the database and sort of, rehydrated, And security is aspect, audit is aspect, all sorts of things that we are currently coding for just need to stay out of the code and become incredibly aspect, whether through annotations or whatever mechanisms we can think of, container level stuff that we can think of that can actually make that work for us. So, what we're gunning for, again, I'm probably reiterating. We want a model. This model needs to have a meta model. This meta model tells you exactly what this model is capable of and what it's about. And you can start the whole process simply by asking it, what are you and what are you about? Right? Lovely stuff. And that's where you can now put it wherever you want, because it doesn't really matter anymore, because as long as the container knows how to sort of handle this model that you've created, it doesn't really care about a lot of the other things that it usually needed to care about, very specific things, because all it's cares about is the meta model. And this meta model enables it to do everything that a container would have to do with the software. And then, between yourself and the model and the presentation layer as well, is the meta model. I chose that because I knew this is be a guy audience, mostly. But, again, presentation does not care about what it is that it's trying to present. What it cares about is that I can find out what it is and then I can display it. And that's where things are inevitably going to have to go, because we're spending far too much time writing this presentation code and then trying to keep it in sync with our model when the model changes, and oh no, now there's a database change that sort of also has to ripple up this whole stack. And that's the problem that Mr. Parsons was trying to solve when he came up with the naked objects philosophy. All of this, really, this idea that model is the entire piece of software and everything else is just aspects. All of that actually comes from Mr. Parsons, and yeah, it was a very big revelation for me. Oh, okay, yeah, and that was really it. I think, yeah, that was the big idea that I wanted to bring across, but there's still questions. And this is where I think there's space for us to actually have a conversation. This is how I imagine this going. I have questions, you have questions, but I'm the speaker. I ask questions first. And my first question is really around, okay, I've already answered that. Yes, feedback loops are structure for all systems. Yes, they are. So, open virtual renderers. For me, I watched a show called Summer Wars, and in that show, what happened was the internet. Don't laugh. This didn't work out for me but in this show, what happened was there was a virtual reality. The internet was turned into a virtual reality where they had this particular model where you come in as an object, but the renderer is the internet. The internet knows how to render your object, and people register all sorts of services and all of that type of stuff. But you've got your container at home, which is your laptop or whatever, and you interact with the internet with your model, which is rendered in maybe in human form, with an avatar. So it can do things like walk and all of that type of stuff. So this separation of concerns from model to presentation to container becomes very powerful. And then my last question is conversation about conversation the future of Agile? So I saw two parallels there. I saw that we need to start having a conversation. This is what we're having here in this. We're having a conversation about our conversation. We've spoken about words. We've spoken about how we need to change our words in order to change our performance. That's a conversation about conversation. I feel like that actually is the realm in which Agile is playing. And that's where its power is. When you interweave the conversation about your conversation into your conversation, then you structure your conversation a lot more powerfully. And what that sort of was mirrored for me in the code was by the meta model. The meta model is what actually describes your object, your entire software. So it's meta information, really, that gives you a lot more independence than you had before. Yeah. I asked it and answered it, but you can also ask any questions. Yeah, that's all I have to say, right there.
Sizwe, you've spoken a lot about the meta model and how that will avoid, making a change to your model, that now percolating all the way up to your presentation or all the way down to your persistence layer. But don't you now spend the same amount of time maintaining your meta model than what you did maintaining your presentation layer or your persistence layer?
No, because the meta model is generated. When you understand that all you actually ever have is objects that have behavior and state, you can write a reflective API that basically goes through your objects, figures out what state it's trying to, handle, and what operations are available. And, and if you've maybe exposed this over REST, it'll give you all of the various endpoints for, so yes, we'd wanna not actually make the meta. The important thing about the meta model is that it needs to be generated. It can't be something that you actually create. Yes, sure.
So, am I on? Okay, so maybe you can just give me a bit of a simple, clear example of maybe even in a code base of take me through a hello world of what you've now described of your meta model and your presentation and all those kind of things, and what the meta models would look like and so forth. Just a very simple.
I ought to have done that.
Your idea of hello world.
I ought to have done that because there's actually significant amounts of work being done in this area by the proponents of naked objects. One of the frameworks that you can look at that has already implemented this, it's relatively stable. It's in the Apache Foundation. I think, yeah, it's on version 1.8. It's called Apache ISIS. It's an unfortunate name, but they've decided to stick with it. They're running with it. We're called Apache ISIS. And it is an implementation of domain-driven design, and you can actually just look them up and do their to-do app, their hello world. It is really, really very straightforward. All you write is the model, and you get everything else for free. Annotations here and there. But yeah, when next time I give this presentation to you, I'll make sure that it's in there. Any more questions?
One more question is that, does that mean standardized user interfaces?
So, I like that question because that's for me the world of renderers. Renderers are this open virtual renderers question. That's where it's going to go crazy because people will write renderers that can, display objects in all sorts of different ways. It's like a skin. It's a skin on a meta model. It doesn't really matter. But yes, there's a degree of standardization also happening because the users get a sense of a consistency about the underlying software. There's no big surprises. You're working with objects that have actions that you can perform against them. And these are being presented so it's a long run game, but yes, I don't think there's some standardization, but there's also a lot of room to play in terms of how you can render a meta model.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Sure.
I would have been surprised, Chris.
Hi, Sizwe. I guess it's maybe just a more industry-based question. I mean, naked objects is not a new philosophy. It's been around for, correct me, about over 15 years.
Yes.
So I guess my question is, if I speak about model-driven design, model-driven architecture, all that sort of stuff, that's been around for many years as well. Why do you think these philosophies are struggling to take traction in the market?
Yeah, I think a previous speaker alluded to it earlier, that here in South Africa, was it Asma? No, it wasn't. There was a speaker, yes, it was Asma, who was alluding to the idea that we haven't hit some sort of tipping point of talent. And when we hit that tipping point of talent, amazing things, rainbow farts, everything is going to happen. But we haven't hit it yet. But we must strive for it. We must strive for it. We must actually push to get these ideas out there so that even though the industry is going to take a while to catch up, probably, you know, sort of another 20 years from now, the big banks are still going to have COBOL running somewhere. Nonetheless, we need to push forward with these ideas. So, yeah, no, yeah.
Maybe just to iterate, I guess I was talking internationally, not so much South Africa.
Oh, internationally.
Do you feel there's a lot of traction in these sorts of models internationally?
Yes. Internationally, it is, I think the trend of thought is around that, where guys are looking for less technical issues and more semantic issues, because the technical issues, we've been dealing with that for the past, I don't know, since IT began. And yes, they've been challenging, they've been fun, but it seems now that the problem space has moved more to a semantic one, where we're trying to understand where the value actually comes from. And quite often, it's not exactly in the technical stuff, it's in the words that we use, in the software, and what it actually is trying to model. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Sizwe.
Thank you very much,
a round of
guys.
applause for Sizwe. So just some announcements to make, guys, before we leave.